When we first started the show, I really thought we were doing a show about building cars and motorcycles for people. It evolved into a show about people and their story. It really brought challenges in the early days.
Trusted most with your money was quietly robbing you blind. Or imagine building something from nothing, pouring your heart into every single weld, every coat of paint, every late night in the garage, and then watching the people you hired like family slowly tear it apart from inside. Danny Coker built Kindig Customs into one of the most recognized custom car shops in America. He turned a passion project into a hit television show, a brand, and a legacy. But not everyone who walked through those garage doors deserved to be there. Some left quietly, some left in scandal, and some left a hole in the shop that took years to fill. Today, we are going inside the stories that the cameras never fully captured. The employees who tested Danny's patience, broke his trust, and in some cases, crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. These are the 5 worst employees in Kindig Cars history, and the full story behind each one of them is a lot more complicated than you might think. Before we get into the drama, it is worth understanding just how much Danny Coker put into building everything that Kindig Customs became. Because when you understand what he built, you understand exactly how much it hurt when certain people let him down. Danny grew up in Detroit, Michigan, a city where cars are not just transportation. They are culture, identity, and pride. The streets of Detroit in the 70s and 80s were filled with the sound of roaring engines, and Danny soaked all of it in from a young age. His father, Danny Coker Sr., was a musician who traveled with gospel groups and brought a deep love of performance and artistry into the household. That creative energy mixed with the mechanical world around them. And Danny Jr. came out the other side as someone who could appreciate both the beauty of a perfectly tuned engine and the soul of a well-played chord. As a teenager, Danny was already spending every spare moment under the hood of something. While other kids his age were chasing other interests, Danny was chasing down old cars, figuring out what made them tick, and learning how to bring them back to life. He had a natural instinct for it. He could look at a beat-up classic sitting in someone's driveway and see what it could become rather than what it was. That vision would eventually become his greatest professional gift. When Danny moved to Las Vegas in the early 90s, he brought that gift with him. He carved out a quirky lane for himself as a local television personality named Count Coolrider, a rock and roll vampire character who hosted late-night horror films. It was campy and bold and completely his own, and it gave him a small but loyal following in Vegas. But cars were always the real plan. He started Kindig Customs primarily to work on his own personal collection, and word spread fast that what he was creating was something special. He was not just restoring cars. He was transforming them into something that felt alive. Collectors came. Celebrities followed. And eventually, television came calling. His recurring appearances as a vehicle expert on Pawn Stars gave producers enough evidence that Danny had the kind of screen presence audiences connect with immediately. In 2012, Kindig Cars launched on the History Channel, and the rest, as they say, is history. The show became one of the most watched automotive programs on television, drawing millions of viewers who tuned in not just to see incredible builds, but to spend time with the people in the shop. The crew felt like a real family, and Danny was the heart of all of it. But families are complicated, and as the show grew bigger, the pressures grew right along with it. Television has a way of making everything look effortless. On Kindig Cars, a full restoration that took weeks of real work would get wrapped up in a single episode. The frustrations, the delays, the parts that arrived damaged, the designs that had to be scrapped and started over, none of that made the final cut. What viewers saw was the highlight reel of a very long and demanding process. And that gap between reality and what appeared on screen created its own kind of pressure inside the shop. Danny is not someone who accepts mediocre work. His standards are genuinely high, and the people who worked for him knew it. If something was not right, it went back. If a paint job had one flaw too many, the whole panel could end up redone. That commitment to quality was what made Kindig Customs worth watching in the first place. But it also made the shop a demanding environment. Long hours were normal. Tight deadlines were constant. And everyone had to perform not just as a craftsman, but also as a television personality, which is a very different skill set. When the show became a genuine hit, the shop's dynamic shifted in ways nobody had fully planned for. Tourists started arriving from all over the country, wanting to see the place they had watched on their screens. The crew, who had once worked in relative peace, now had cameras rolling, fans knocking, and the knowledge that millions of people were watching every move they made. Some people handled that beautifully. Others did not. And a few used the spotlight in ways that ultimately cost them their place in the shop. What follows are the 5 stories of employees whose time at Kindig Customs ended badly, or at least ended with questions that fans and longtime viewers never fully got answers to from the show itself. The first name on this list is one that most casual fans of the show would not immediately recognize, because this person never appeared on camera in any meaningful way. His role was entirely behind the scenes, and that, as it turned out, was exactly the problem. Joseph Frontiero worked as the bookkeeper for Kindig Customs during the show's run. His job was one of the most important in any business, managing the money. He handled payroll, tracked expenses, paid vendors, and was responsible for making sure the financial side of the operation stayed healthy and honest. Danny trusted him with access to the shop's accounts because that was simply what the job required. You cannot run a growing business without trusting someone to handle the numbers. That trust was catastrophically misplaced. Over time, Frontiero used his access to the shop's finances for his own personal benefit, diverting more than $75,000 away from the business for his own expenses. The purchases he made with stolen funds were not exactly subtle. He used company money toward a personal down payment on a luxury vehicle. He bought airline tickets and covered travel costs for himself. And to keep any of this from being discovered, he forged Danny Coker's signature on documents and created false financial records designed to cover his tracks. When the discrepancies were eventually uncovered, the reaction inside the shop was exactly what you would expect: fury, disbelief, and a deep sense of betrayal. This was not a rounding error or an honest accounting mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated scheme carried out by someone who had been trusted completely. The money he stole could have gone into building inventory, paying the crew, investing in the shop's growth, or any number of legitimate purposes. Instead, it funded his personal lifestyle while he sat behind a desk, pretending to protect the business. In 2016, Kindig Customs took legal action, filing a lawsuit not only against Frontiero himself, but also against Randstad USA, the staffing agency that had placed him in the bookkeeper role. The claim against the agency centered on their alleged failure to conduct adequate background screening before placing someone in a position with that level of financial access. The case became public, and fans who had never heard Frontiero's name suddenly found themselves reading about one of the uglier chapters in the show's behind-the-scenes history. Frontiero had already been removed from his position before the lawsuit became public knowledge. Viewers had never seen him leave because viewers had never really seen him at all. He simply stopped appearing in whatever peripheral capacity he had occupied, without any on-air acknowledgement. After the legal action, he disappeared entirely from public life. No statements, no interviews, no social media presence to speak of. The damage he left behind was not just financial. It forced Danny and the team to rethink how they handled internal trust, financial oversight, and the vetting of people brought into the business. Tighter controls were put in place, and the hard lesson was learned at a very real cost. The second name on this list was far more visible to fans, and his story is actually one of the more nuanced ones on this entire list. Scott Jones appeared in the very first season of Counting Cars as the shop manager and someone who also had a hand in the financial side of operations. He was blunt, serious, and made no effort to hide when he disagreed with something. On a show built around big personalities, Scott was the counterweight, the person who asked the uncomfortable questions about budgets, timelines, and whether a particular idea was actually going to pencil out. That dynamic created real tension with Danny, and the cameras captured plenty of it. Danny has always been someone who chases the vision, who pushes builds further than originally planned, because the end result is worth it. Scott was the person in the room asking what that decision was going to cost. Neither approach is wrong. In fact, a healthy business usually needs both. But when those two perspectives clash repeatedly and on camera, The friction becomes part of the show's storyline, whether anyone planned it that way or not. After the second season, Scott was gone. For fans who had gotten used to seeing him in the shop, the disappearance was jarring, and the absence of any explanation from the show only made the speculation louder online. Rumors circulated about financial mismanagement and deeper, behind-the-scenes conflicts, and without an official statement from anyone involved, those rumors had room to grow into something bigger than the actual truth. The actual truth, based on what has been reported since, is considerably less dramatic. Scott Jones left Las Vegas for Tennessee because he wanted to be closer to his family. That was the real reason. Not a firing, not a scandal, not an ugly falling out, just a personal decision that had nothing to do with anything that happened on screen or behind it. Sometimes life takes people in different directions, and that is exactly what happened here. Scott has continued working in the automotive world since leaving the show. He runs his own operation in Tennessee and has made television appearances elsewhere, most notably on the Netflix series Swap Shop. He clearly never lost his passion for the work. His time on Counting Cars may have been defined partly by conflict, but his departure turned out to be one of the cleanest and most straightforward exits in the show's history. If Scott's story turned out to be less dramatic than the rumors suggested, the third name on this list is the one that hit fans the hardest, precisely because of how beloved this person was before everything changed. Rolly Sabo was, for several seasons, one of the most genuinely entertaining presences on Counting Cars. He worked as a lead detailer in the shop, responsible for making sure every vehicle that rolled out of Kindig Customs looked absolutely perfect before it reached its new owner. Rolly brought something to the show that is genuinely rare in reality television, a warmth that felt completely unperformed. His thick Hungarian accent, his enormous smile, his readiness to crack a joke or break into a little dance during a long workday, all of it read as completely authentic because it was. He had a natural ability to make the people around him feel comfortable, and the camera loved him for it. But he was not just a personality. He was a legitimate craftsman who took real pride in every inch of detailing work he produced. Fans responded to that combination in a big way, and by the middle seasons of the show, Rolly was one of the most talked about members of the crew. His exit in 2017 came without warning and without explanation. One episode, he was there, buffing out paint and laughing with the crew. The next, he simply was not. The show offered no farewell, no acknowledgement, no scene where Danny or anyone else addressed the change. For fans who had grown genuinely fond of Rolly over multiple seasons, the silence was unsettling. What eventually emerged through reports and insider accounts was that valuable detailing equipment had gone missing from the shop around the time of Rolly's departure. The equipment in question was professional-grade gear worth thousands of dollars, and the timing of its disappearance alongside Rolly's sudden exit created a connection that was difficult to ignore. Kindig Customs never issued an official public statement directly linking Rolly to the missing equipment, and it is important to note that no formal legal proceedings were publicly documented in connection with this situation. But the circumstances left a cloud over his departure that no one ever fully cleared away. What makes Rolly's story genuinely complicated is what came after. He stayed in Las Vegas and built his own detailing business, Rock and Rolly Custom Detailing, which has developed a solid reputation and a loyal client base. The work he does there reflects the same level of skill and attention that he brought to Kindig Customs during his best years on the show. Whatever the full truth of his exit may be, not every difficult departure involves money or missing equipment. Sometimes the hardest exits are the ones that happen slowly, almost invisibly, because a person realizes that the world they are living in no longer matches who they actually are. That is the story of Shannon Ikaw, and in many ways it is the most quietly affecting one on this entire list. Shannon was the lead motorcycle builder at Kindig Customs, and within that specific role, he was genuinely exceptional. His work on custom bikes combined technical precision with real artistic vision. The machines he built were not just functional. They had character, personality, a sense of intention in every line and curve. He was the kind of craftsman who could look at a blank frame and see the finished bike already waiting inside it, the way a sculptor sees a figure waiting inside a block of stone. He was not the loudest person in the shop. He did not perform for the cameras the way some of his colleagues did, and he was not interested in creating drama to keep things entertaining. He showed up, he built incredible bikes, and he let the work speak for itself. Fans who paid close attention appreciated exactly that quality about him. He brought a steadiness to the show that balanced out some of the bigger personalities around him. As Counting Cars evolved over its later seasons, the show leaned increasingly into the storytelling and tension that reality television typically rewards. More manufactured conflict, more dramatic moments, more emphasis on the interpersonal dynamics of the crew, and less on the actual craft of building. That shift made sense from a ratings perspective, and it clearly worked. But it did not sit well with everyone inside the shop, and Shannon was among those who found the new direction difficult to reconcile with why he had gotten into this work in the first place. He began appearing less frequently. His screen time gradually diminished across several seasons until he was barely visible at all. And eventually, without any announcement or confrontation, he was simply no longer part of the show. He never made a public statement blaming anyone. He never gave an interview full of grievances. He just moved on, the same way he had always worked, quietly, with his head down and his hands busy. Shannon continues to build custom motorcycles in Las Vegas today. He remains a respected figure in that community, and the bikes he produces still carry the unmistakable quality that defined his work on the show. His story is ultimately one about integrity, about knowing what you value and being willing to walk away from something good when it stops aligning with those values. That kind of self-awareness is actually pretty rare, and it deserves to be recognized as such. T-Man clearly never stopped loving the craft itself. The final name on this list is one that longtime fans will remember vividly, because this person was essentially impossible to overlook. Mike Henry, widely known by his nickname Horny Mike, was the lead airbrush artist at Kindig Customs and one of the most visually distinctive figures in the show's entire run. Between the horned helmet, the wild hair, the outsized personality, and the genuinely stunning artwork he produced, Mike was someone you noticed. But it would be a mistake to reduce him to just a character. Mike was a serious, trained artist with a real background in custom paint and three-dimensional sculpting. The work he brought to Kindig Customs was not just decorative, it was transformative. He could take a vehicle that was already mechanically exceptional and add a visual layer that elevated the whole thing into something that felt more like fine art than automotive work. Flames that seemed to move, portraits that captured real emotion, abstract designs that rewarded a second and third look. His contributions to the shop's most memorable builds were significant.